We have a caller from a 512 area code ending in the digit 01. Could you please identify yourself?
Yeah, I'm Dale Ross, Mayor of Georgetown, Texas.
Thank you.
Hey, Corbin.
Howdy.
This is Dale Ross.
Hey, Dale.
How are you?
Good.
So we don't do Zoom anymore on these? We do WebEx?
I think we've always used WebEx.
I think we've always used WebEx.
Oh, I remember doing Zoom meetings. So okay, that's good.
We have another caller from a 512 area code ending in 91. Could you please identify yourself?
Yes, this is Donna Carter. I'm here for item 9.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. Chair Long, we started the recording and the live streaming, so whenever you are ready to get started, then everything is ready to go.
Okay, do we have Gerald Darty on? Okay, what about Judge Bisco? Commissioner Jones? What about Terry Mitchell? Or Commissioner Shea?
I'm a proxy today.
Okay, thank you. So I've got, I believe everybody else accounted for, as I saw you pop on. So with that, we do have a quorum. And if any of those other individuals jump on between now and then, please help me keep track of that, fellow board members. Thank you. With that, we'll move on to first of all, let me call the meeting to order at 2:03 p.m. on the 12th of October. And once again, we are meeting virtually, and we have a quorum of the board. So we'll move on to item number 2, public comments. And I have 3 people signed up, but I just wanted to clarify, all seem to be related to the Alexander Farm. Are you all, I believe you all are for item number 9 and not public comments. Is that correct?
We are for both.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to check. All right, we'll start with Rosalind, and you know the drill. You've got 3 minutes, and welcome today. And just as a reminder, later on in the agenda, we will hear from TxDOT on this specific project.
Thank you.
Let's see, let me get my timer started here. And you have 3 minutes.
My name is Rosalind Alexander Kasparek. I'm a 6th-generation Texas-born and bred descendant of Daniel Alexander and his mother, Senny. The Alexander Farm and Alexander Cemetery, seated between 5,800 and 6,000, Highway 183 South, just over a mile outside of Austin, was founded by my great-great-grandfather, enslaved thoroughbred racehorse breeder and trainer Daniel Alexander. Daniel and his mother, Cindy, came to Travis County in January of 1839 with the family of Texas founding father, Thomas Freeman McKinney. Generations of McKinneys had owned and raced thoroughbred horses from the mid-1700s in Virginia, Kentucky, and Missouri. Their progenitor immigrated to America from Scotland before the Revolutionary War. When the McKinneys got to Texas, they raced their thoroughbreds first in Galveston in the 1820s and 30s, then at Onion Creek near McKinney Falls, Texas, from the 1840s forward. Daniel also accompanied thoroughbreds on the McKinney and Williams Company fleet of ferries and schooners to New Orleans and other horse races with hefty purses throughout the country. Daniel was one of thousands of enslaved, highly skilled African Americans in the early days of our nation, whom historians now refer to as racehorsemen. They nurtured and developed horse racing into America's first sport. They were not only the first riders in the Kentucky Derby, they were the sports celebrity athletes, coaches, and mentors of their day. Daniel Alexander is well remembered by his celebrity mentees in the nation's racing records of the late 19th century. Daniel Alexander trained the McKinney's thoroughbred horses, at least one of which was sired by Sir Archie's line, a bloodline that eventually brought the world Triple Crown winner Secretariat. Daniel also trained Copperbottom, General Sam Houston's quarter horse, who was also of the Sir Archie bloodline. As were many of his fellow black racehorse men, Daniel earned favored status from the McKinneys for his mastery of the animal husbandry that led to wins on the tracks. The Alexander farm has been held by Cindy and Daniel's descendants from, at latest, 1847, when he was given the land to homestead in exchange for his horse racing acumen. He was also introduced by the McKinneys to an Irish indentured servant, Emmeline Adams, whom he married. The Choctaw, Muskogee, Yamasee Nation of indigenous people, now headquartered in Oklahoma, still recognize Daniel Alexander as one of their own. Like Sam Houston, whom the Cherokee dubbed Raven, Daniel Alexander's community races during the Republic of Texas years during Reconstruction and into the early 20th century were legendary. Indigenous prehistory has never been far from our homeland or homestead. The Smith Rock Shelter, used since 500 BCE by Central Texas indigenous people at McKinney Falls near the Alexander Farm, is on the National Registry of Historic Places. The acreage that Daniel Alexander raised his family on for decades is still the Alexander homestead. The gated Alexander Cemetery contains Daniel's remains and those of some 60 marked and unmarked Alexander descendants. If the Alexander Farm and Alexander Cemetery are harmed by this roadway expansion, please understand there is no other place, no replacement in Central Texas or the United States for our farm and cemetery. Thank you.
Thank you. We will move on to Marcellus Alexander Jr. Are you with us?
I am. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm
You have
Marcellus Alexander.
Let's go ahead. And before you start, if everybody else would please mute their microphone so we don't have any background noise, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. All right, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Marcellus Alexander Jr., sixth generation descendant of Cindy and Daniel, and the namesake of my paternal and maternal grandfathers. In 1966, the National Historic Preservation Act and the U.S. DOT Code became the law of the land. It prohibited the taking of historic sites. Despite the law, in 1968, the then Texas Highway Department took land from the front of the Alexander Farm and Alexander Cemetery to convert Rural Route 2 into a 4-lane plus median version of today's US 183 South. Daniel Alexander's grandson, Milton Everett Alexander, fought the taking. He was distressed that TxDOT's precursor not only took our land, but wasted a 100-foot sliver on the other side of what is now the highway. Similarly, McKinney family historian Margaret Henson writes that the enslaved people's burial grounds near McKinney Falls were bulldozed to create a golf course because there were no preservation mandates in place at that time. So we, the Alexander family descendants of Daniel and Cindy, come to Campo, a body of elected county and municipal officials with oversight responsibility for roadway expansion, to be sure you know our land's legacy, its story, and our legal right to prevent TxDOT incursion. We are very proud of our heritage in this specific place during this particular 200 years of Texas and American history and culture. Since Cindy and Daniel's day, our family has produced farmers, ranchers, entrepreneurs, as well as corporate executives and professionals. We've taken Daniel's task and built a way out of the no way of slavery. This place, The Alexander Farm and Alexander Cemetery is our home. It is the bedrock of our sense of family. It is a source of pride for our community, as evidenced in our historical recognitions by state and local government and cultural agencies. We are the first in the Founding Families Room at the Carver Museum and Cultural Center and have been featured at the Bergstrom International Airport. We are repeatedly referenced in Texas state publications as among Central Texas' longest standing African-American family farms. We were born with and have managed to keep what has been stripped away from so many African-American families in Texas and the United States. That is a clear sense of place, of where we come from, and who we are. Our father used to tell us, stay put, stay strong, be patient, and the world will come back around to your way of thinking. We remain optimistic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. And finally, we have Juanelle Herron.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You have 3 minutes. You may begin. Thank you.
I'm Juanelle Alexander Herron, a sixth-generation Texan and descendant of Cindy and Daniel Alexander. We learned of TxDOT's plans to expand Highway 183 and potentially take from us again in November of 2019, when we received a postcard informing us of a community meeting for input from concerned parties and stakeholders. We shared claims confirming our property's historic significance, and we were reassured that the health codes and our designations from the Texas Historical Commission should prevent any incursion. We watched as plans for Highway 183 north of Highway 71, which started as 4 lanes and is now being considered to stretch 12 lanes, which include the access roads, based on contracts that were approved by this board and others in 2014, the year we laid our parents to rest in the Alexander Cemetery. Our dad, Marcellus Winston Alexander, passed away 5 days after our mother in November of that same year. He had lived on the Alexander farm his entire 97 years. Our mother, Juanita Alexander, had lived on the farm since she married our father in the small house in which the current owners of the Alexander farm grew up. After the shock of the 1968 Texas Highway Department taking of Alexander land, we were confused and further distressed by the lack of information and direction offered by the TxDOT at the TxDOT community meeting. We learned that TxDOT's proposed route would destroy and eliminate our gated cemetery and most of the houses and other buildings on our farm. We asked for and were granted a stakeholders meeting with TxDOT in early February 2020. We were calmed by verbal promises of alternative routes to be delineated and evaluated by TxDOT engineers. We waited and heard nothing more from TxDOT. We sought and won the support of state-level elected officials who also called a meeting with TxDOT. TxDOT officials repeated their assurances with no new information as to alternative routing of the expansion of the roadway that abuts our 173-year-old African-American farm. My sister Rosalind began offering public comments objecting to the expansion project as it appeared in Campo's regional plans. We also wrote a formal letter as a family to TxDOT. We have received a copy of the contract that had been awarded to CP&Y in the summer of 2019 to conduct a study of the expansion. A mere 3 miles from our gates, we recently witnessed the start of construction on a new highway infrastructure for Highway 183 just past 71. Still no word from TxDOT on the promised alternative routes. To be clear, our family wants this board to know that we don't view our participation in today's meeting as an academic exercise. This is our property. We care deeply about it and are focused on preserving the rich history of our ancestors as well as looking forward for future generations of our family. Thank you, and this concludes our comments.
Thank you, Ms. Herron. We appreciate it. That concludes public comments, and we'll move on to chair announcements. I have none at this time. I may circle back at the end of the meeting. Next up is report from the Technical Advisory Committee, and Julia, I saw you on the call. So if you want to go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Great. Okay, so I'm Julia Cleary, and I will be standing in for Chair Hodge this afternoon. So the TAC met virtually on Monday, September 28th. And with the exception of the approval of the minutes, there were no action items, but there were a couple of items for information and discussion. Firstly, there was a discussion on the criteria for the Federal Transit Administration's 5310 program. I believe that's item 10 on your policy board agenda today, which allocates funding to government agencies and non-profits for transit programs in the urbanized area. There were a couple of comments from the TAC, including a suggestion that it might be more efficient to allocate the funding for a 2-year cycle as opposed to an annual cycle. And there was also a request for clarification regarding the 5310 selection process itself and the role of the TAC, specifically questions as to why the TAC itself was not being asked to give recommendations on the proposed projects as it does on the TIP. Following on from that, there was a brief discussion on the fall amendment cycle for the TIP and the Regional Transportation Plan. We had a presentation on a potential Campo Open Roads policy from Kimley Horn and Associates. The Open Roads policy was something that was proposed in the Regional Incident Management Study back in 2018, with the objective of clearing roads as quickly as possible whenever there is an accident in order to get traffic moving again. In terms of, specifically, there was a target to clear freeways, for freeways to be cleared in 30 minutes and other roadways to be cleared within 60 minutes. In terms of comments received, one member stressed the importance of looking at frontage roads as well as main lanes during incidents. And he had a request that a numeric time goal be established for the traffic control centres to measure how long it takes them to adjust to the green times on the frontage roads during incidents. There were also comments regarding the need for communications training throughout the region. There was a query regarding the status of the TxDOT Austin Incident Management Program and its status. And one member suggested there was a need to market alternative routes of key arterials to the public, particularly during the I-35 construction period. There was some discussion regarding performance measures and working with the DPS regarding data for officer report to into CRIS, which is the TxDOT crash reporting system. There were a couple of questions about scope and the applicability of the policy. And finally, there was some discussion on engaging and consulting with rural agencies through CAPGOG. And with that, I would be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Julia. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, hearing none, we will move on. There is no need for an executive session today, item 5, so we will move on to item number 6, discussing appropriate action on the August 10th, 2020 meeting minutes. I'm assuming everybody's had a chance to review those. Is there a motion?
Move to approve, Oakley.
Okay, Judge Oakley.
Second.
Councilmember Matea seconds. Is there any discussion? Okay, I'm going to go in the reverse. Is there anybody against the motion? Okay, we will go with everybody else is in favor of the motion. And I just wanted to add also that I have seen Terry Mitchell join, and I think we're still missing Commissioner Doherty, Judge Bisco, but I think everybody else is accounted for. So, all right, thank you. The motion passes unanimously. Item number 7, discuss and take appropriate action on the 2020-2021 Unified Planning Work Program, Amendment number 3. Ms. Hernandez.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're doing an amendment number 3 to the fiscal year 2020 and 2021 UPWP. So we're going to go ahead and discuss the carryovers what we're doing is we're carrying over some funding, unexpensed funding from fiscal year 2020 to fiscal year 2021. And those projects are for the GPC. We're carrying over some STBG and some local funding. We're carrying over the TDC, though the TDM program, some STBG and TDCs. Those were also unexpensed. We just received a AFA. We are waiting for a notice to proceed on that project. The next carryover would be for the San Marcos Platinum Planning Study, also STBG and local funds. And then we have our Yarrington Road project. That is also STBG and some state funding that we are carrying over. So all of those projects are ongoing at the moment. Some are coming close to their end, so those will be wrapped up in fiscal year 2021. So the next one we will go to is some new funding for the RTC. We are adding $70,000 of FTA 5304 funds. So in fiscal year 2021, we programmed 25,000. So we're just adding 70,000 of that funding. The next one would be our City of Round Rock. We received a request from the City of Round Rock to add their transit master plan update to our UPWP, and that's per federal regulation. So the funding includes some Federal Transit Administration funds, 5307. Those are funds that were granted to the City of Round Rock. So those are not our funding, and they will be providing the 200,000 or 200. I mean, it's a 250,000 total. The 50,000 is local funds from the City of Round Rock. Next slide, please. This was not included in the background paper, but I did notice that on page 18, there is a grand total column that states 2018 and 2019. So we're going to change that to reflect the current UPWP, which is 2020 and 2021. Also on page 30 in the state column for task 5, we are adding a missing figure of 185,900. Now the total is correct, but for some reason the number didn't transfer over to the state funding, so we're just correcting that to add that to our column. Next slide, please. So with that, I'll take any questions. And if we don't have any, we're requesting that the UPWP Amendment 3 be approved and its accompanying resolution 2020-10-7.
Oakley moves for approval.
Second, Morgan.
Okay, there's been a motion by Judge Oakley and a second by Mayor Morgan to approve.
Discussion, Madam Chair?
Yes, let me finish.
Okay.
So we've got a motion and a second. Now I'll take any questions. And Pavilion, go ahead, please.
Okay. I do not have any questions as to the merit of moving the funds forward. However, I would like to have a better delineation of the projects that the funds are being forwarded to address. I have been discussing how we lay out a general project when we start talking about dollars, the general scope of the project, whether the project manager of any specific project is a Campo staff member or a consultant, whether we have some type of priority ranking in the UPWP or whatever risk assessment we use to select the projects that we're working on, some type of schedule with milestones. What is the status in the work phase now, and then some type of estimated completion date. I think it's okay if we're talking about moving funds forward, but we should be able to identify the projects for which the funding is being moved and when we can expect outcomes from that funding.
I'm going to let or Ashby address your concerns. I believe in the backup, it lists the general projects, and this is a carryover of projects we've already approved from one year to the next. But I'm going to let Ashby or Teresa go ahead. Any other specifics?
We can definitely get you a timeline for that. I can work with the project managers to get that to you as needed.
Okay, I appreciate that. What I'm really looking for is kind of a matrix of projects. Which projects are we talking about? Which projects are associated with the dollars that we're talking about? And then kind of category by category. So we have a matrix of projects that we're talking about and the scope of the projects that we're talking about, and then when we can expect the outcomes from those projects. It's really more just a tracking mechanism than anything else, taking what is very general to make it a little more precise so we understand the activity that is going on over time.
Sure, not a problem.
Thank you. Are there any other? Okay. Hearing none. Are there any board members? Motion. Okay. Hearing none. Anybody else? Motion, and that motion passes unanimously. Again, if you wouldn't mind muting if you're not speaking, that would be great.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
One more thing. Could that assessment be done by the December policy board meeting?
I will have to ask staff. A level of detail of the projects is in the backup material, and so if you could perhaps delineate some more specifics and get that to Ashby, then he can give us feedback to let us know if, at the point in time. I mean, I'm sure all the information are getting it accumulated into a format.
I'll be happy to work with Ashley and his staff to get it into a form that would be working paper oriented. So that's fine. Great,
thank you. All right. Item number 8 is the schedule of next meeting schedule for 2021. And everybody will put those on their calendar, but we'll go ahead and vote on those. As you know, if there are action items for those, we obviously want to meet, but we don't want to meet just for the sake of meeting. And so, as you know, this summer there were a couple of meetings that we canceled because there simply wasn't action that we needed to take. But if you'll go ahead and put these dates on your calendar, and I'll take a motion to approve those dates.
Motion approved.
Houston will second, and it looks like these are consistently the second Monday, so thank you for doing that so we can get it on our calendar easily and it's consistent.
All right, thank you. That's a motion. Or anybody? Okay, hearing none, we'll.
Chair, your audio is really cutting out because not everybody has muted. Can you please restate what you just said?
Oh, I'm sorry. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. So put those dates on your calendar for 2021. All right, we're going to.
Except for December, which is the first Monday. All the rest are consistently second Monday.
Right. Thank you. Move on to item number 9, and we have. Again, I'm asking if you.
Madam Chair, could you just mute everybody and then we'll go?
Well, I'm not in control of that. Their staff is wise not to give me that level of control of the meeting.
Touche.
I think everybody has done that now. And we have 4 individuals who have signed up to speak on this item. But I'm going to ask, would you all rather, and I'll defer to the speakers that have signed up, if we want to hear the presentation from TxDOT first and then hear your comments, we can do that, or you can go ahead and speak now. Ms. Rosalind, I'll defer to you since you have been the individual that we've heard from the most. What's your preference?
The team. Is the team there? Are the 2 other parties that are speaking this afternoon agreeable to us holding off our comments until after the TxDOT presentation?
This is Elizabeth Merritt. My preference would be for TxDOT to do their presentation first.
Okay.
Okay, great. We will go ahead and do that then. And it looks like that's queued up. And
as would I.
Thank you. And so Heather, I'm going to turn this over to you. And again, a reminder, if everybody would mute their microphone while she's speaking. And then upon her conclusion, we'll hear from the public, and then we'll take any questions from board members. Thank you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Heather Ashley Nguyen, the Transportation Planning and Development Director with TxDOT. The presentation provided in public forum today is the presentation that was provided to some board members following the last policy board meeting. Today, I'll walk through much of the content that was provided at the open house held late last year, summarize comments received, and then discuss where we are in the project development process and next steps. The purpose of the study is to explore potential improvements to US 183 between SH 71 to SH 130. The goal is to enhance safety, mobility, and access within the project area. The study area extends 9 miles between SH 71 and SH 130. Multiple neighborhoods, businesses, and other structures are located along or in close proximity to the corridor, and the Austin-Bergstrom International Airport borders the project at the southeast corner of US 183 and SH 71. The existing roadway right-of-way varies between 100 feet to 175 feet. The existing section is 4 lanes with a median and full shoulders from SH 71 to FM 812, where it narrows to an undivided section at FM 812 with 2-foot shoulders south to SH 130. A typical 6-lane divided roadway with full shoulders requires approximately 175 feet of right-of-way. This photo is for illustration purposes, and only the required number of lanes will be determined after completion of traffic studies. A typical freeway section requires approximately 400 feet of right-of-way with a 6-lane main lane section and a 6-lane frontage road section. As was the previous divided section, this illustration is conceptual only, and required number of lanes for the US 183 corridor will be determined after completion of traffic studies. The population of Austin area has grown significantly in recent years, as shown by these statistics. This image illustrates the population growth between 2010 and 2017 within the different neighboring census tracts along the corridor. The northern limits shown in dark purple indicate population growth between 41 to 47%, with the white area indicating ABIA with no population growth. Although there is no population growth in the property area around ABIA, the airport has developed a master plan which would increase adjacent travel demands in the area. The lighter purple tracts to the south range from 22 to 30% growth rate. This data was calculated before Campo's recent demographic study and also after Tesla's Gigafactory was announced. Therefore, these numbers are conservative. The increase in population results in the need for transportation improvements. Compounded annual growth rates between the years of 2003 and 2018 can be summarized into the northern and southern halves, with FM 1625 as the breakpoint, shown here to the north circled in orange and to the south circled in purple. To the north, growth rates range between 5 to 7.5%, and to the south range from 4 to 5%. In particular, growth rates doubled north of Burleson in the 5 years between 2013 and 2018 when compared to the previous 5 years. 2018 traffic counts ranged from 20,000 to 44,000 vehicles per day in annual average daily traffic throughout the corridor. This heat map illustrates crash densities over 9 years between the years of 2010 and 2019. The hotspot locations shown in red indicate the intersections with the highest crash rates. Crash rates for the corridor area exceed statewide averages by approximately 20% for similar 4-lane divided roadways. This graphic illustrates the project development process. The project kicked off in the summer of 2019 with a typical duration of 2 to 3 years. In this phase, goals and objectives will be established and potential improvements will be identified and evaluated to enhance safety, access, and mobility within the project area. The study team will identify and evaluate alternatives for addressing the safety and mobility needs of this developing corridor. These alternatives will include route location options as well as design options. The study will conclude with the identification of a recommended alternative. If a build alternative achieves environmental decision, at that time, the project could begin the purchase of established right-of-way and detailed design could begin. An open house was held on November 7, 2019, and 65 members of the public attended and 29 comments were received. Only the typical sections in a blank map were provided to gather comments. The comments are summarized at a high level here. People supported the project and its ability to facilitate growth for businesses, coupled with requests for urgency. A freeway section was requested, while other comments requested a center-left turn lane along the corridor. Requests for improved operations at the 71 US 183 interchange and requests to synchronize traffic signals and for additional lighting. The full public meeting summary or report is provided online. Following the public meeting, we have conducted 12 stakeholder meetings, 2 of which were with the Alexander Farm and family. Lining the corridor are properties that are being considered as subject to provisions of Section 4F of the Department of Transportation Act, and the Alexander Farm is being considered in this category. Section 4F prohibits using land or purchasing right-of-way from a historic property unless there is no feasible and prudent alternative. Through stakeholder outreach, we have identified alternate routes that have been added to the alternatives analysis. The project timeline is shown here. Preliminary route and traffic studies are just wrapping up. As mentioned before, the identification of a new alternate routes required obtaining additional aerial mapping and survey outside the previously established limits. We are targeting spring of 2021 for the next open house, at which time the recommended typical section based on traffic studies will be provided, as well as alternative routes. Following the open house, comments will be considered and alternatives will be screened to determine how well each option satisfies the project's goals and objectives. Until the options are identified, developed, traffic modeling is conducted, and the alternatives evaluation is complete, we are unable to determine what alternative would move forward as recommended. TxDOT and the project team recognizes that public input helps to make projects better. Therefore, we strive to make the project development process transparent and inclusive. We encourage everyone to stay involved in the planning process and to continue to provide comments and feedback. For questions or comments, please visit the project's website or Google search US 183 from SH71 or send an email to the project email address shown here. This concludes today's presentation.
Okay, thank you. Heather, I will now move into the folks that have signed up for public comment on this. Rosalind, you are first to sign up, and then followed by Elizabeth, then Donna, and then Juanelle. So Rosalind, if you want to go ahead, I will start the timer here as soon as I can find it on my phone. All right.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Rosalind.
Okay. During the July CAMPO meeting, Commissioner Bridget Shea verbally expressed her lack of support of TxDOT's US 183 expansion harming the Alexander Farm and Alexander Cemetery. During the August meeting, Commissioner Shea's protestations won the promise of a status report from TxDOT on the impact of its highways expansion on the Alexander Farm. We were elated at the prospect of learning which alternative routes were being considered. We wanted assurance that the partially built infrastructure at SH71 and US 183 did not preclude or preempt from study any routing alternatives that would avoid us entirely. The September CAMPO meeting was canceled, but TxDOT took the opportunity to brief some commissioners on how their expansion might affect our farm. The TxDOT, forgetting its pledge to us and our elected state supporters, neither told the Alexander family of the briefings nor invited us to attend them. We also learned that the long-abandoned Longhorn Speedway property across the highway from part of the Alexander Farm had been sold in June and July of 2020 to Holt Cat, manufacturer of the heavy freeway construction equipment and cranes that will doubtless be necessary for the expansion's construction. We learned that the Charles F. Austin Cemetery across the highway from the Alexander Farm is the final resting place of McKinney's mother and sister, who joined the McKinney brothers at the Falls in the 1850s. Both the Alexander Cemetery and the Austin Cemetery have been designated as historic by the Texas Historical Commission. They sit on opposite sides of US 183 South that is slated for expansion by TxDOT. There has still been no word from TxDOT on its plan to honor moral and legal codes that were enacted to prohibit people's burial sites from being bulldozed. We have awaited TxDOT's alternative routes as we witnessed its continuation of 183 North's extensive widening. It has now been nearly a year since we received the postcard blithely announcing the new study of the US 183 South's expansion. Their preliminary route, that is TxDOT's, will obliterate the Alexander Farm and Alexander Cemetery. For this meeting, we marked a few maps that we asked the CAMPO staff to share with the board on screen. We are not engineers, but in the absence of any other alternatives from TxDOT except the one that will obliterate our farm and cemetery, we thought we'd share some advice that we secured from transportation professionals. Please understand that we are not suggesting that these are the only viable alternatives. Surely they are not. We seek TxDOT's examination of any and all alternatives that will prevent further obliteration of the Alexander Farm and Cemetery.
All right.
Elizabeth? I'm sorry.
All right, thank you. Now, let me reset the timer. Ms. Merritt, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Merritt, and I serve as Deputy General Counsel for the National Trust for Historic Preservation, based in Washington, D.C. I'm participating in this meeting because I want to make sure that the transportation agencies understand, from a national perspective, the stringent legal requirements that apply to protect the Alexander Farm and compel the development of alternatives in order to avoid and minimize harm to the Alexander Farm. The most important of these legal mandates is Section 4F of the Department of Transportation Act. And for any project that includes federal transportation funding, Section 4F prohibits any use of historic properties and other protected sites unless there's no feasible and prudent alternative to the use. And the project includes all possible planning to minimize harm. So in order to justify rejecting an alternative that would avoid the protected site or be less harmful, the transportation agency would have to show that the less harmful alternative would pose unique problems or truly unusual factors, or would involve cost or community disruption of extraordinary magnitudes. In addition to Section 4F, Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act requires the transportation agencies to take into account the potential adverse effects of the project on the Alexander Farm. That take into account requirement is accomplished through a unique consultation process with interested parties to develop and evaluate alternatives and modifications to the project that could avoid, minimize, or mitigate its adverse effects. Now, in this case, there's no dispute that the Alexander Farm is a historic property protected by these laws, and no dispute that this historic property would be used and adversely affected by the project as currently proposed. So it's not a de minimis impact. And as you've heard, the cemetery on the other side of US 183 from the Alexander Farm is also a historic property. Therefore, avoidance alternatives need to be developed now before any further planning work goes forward. And fortunately, it is still early in the environmental review process. In response to the proposed project, the family members developed a few conceptual alternatives which were submitted. As you can see, alternative 1 would serve as a loop to the east. Alternative 2 would be more of an elongated triangle to the east. And alternative 3, which is my favorite, would veer to the northeast along Route 973 and continue directly up to Route 71, which would then connect it back up to Route 180, US 183. These are just conceptual ideas developed by lay people, but they serve as examples of the kind of alternatives that the transportation agencies need to develop now in order to satisfy their strict legal responsibilities under Section 4F and Section 106. We urge the transportation agencies to initiate Section 106 consultation, and thank you in advance for considering these comments.
Thank you for your comments. Let's see, next we have Donna Carter. If you want to go ahead, Ms. Carter, your 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is Donna Carter, FIAIA. I am a preservation architect and planner here in Austin. The historic value of the Alexander Farm and its importance to the family has been demonstrated. But the importance of the farm and its capacity to tell stories of African American settlement in Central Texas is equally important. The homestead lands, the farm, and the historic cemetery are witness to the Alexander family, their relationship to other African American families, and the settlement of Pilot Knob. It shows a family self-sufficient, yet inextricably bound to the broader social order of how African American and white families were connected, and what that means for the telling of Austin's history. As a preservation architect, the fact that TxDOT might blindly find no other alternative than to dig up and take away this legacy is really a measure of the lack of respect we as a community have endured for so long and indeed have come to expect. As Dr. Andrea Roberts has said in her study of freedom colonies, if you interrupt this space with a pipeline, a new freeway, clear cutting, not only have you done something unpleasant and interrupted a sense of place, you are interrupting people's ability to have a communal identity. This is about how African American assets are reviewed and valued, about whether places where African Americans not only lived but thrived, not only have roots but have their own roots, developed with their own hands, and where we determine that indeed our lives matter and that we are taken seriously. What has happened to date is an indictment of how our places have been revered and protected, which is they haven't. Systemically disenfranchised communities often have little to show for their history. There is often no tangible property retained and revered by one family. There are no heirlooms passed down through the generations. The land is the only witness. This land is likely to yield information important to history, which is a criterion for historic designation. Land that is likely to yield important information about Austin's African American history, a history not often told in a nuanced and a contextual manner. This land can be bulldozed, documented in a government report, and then driven over by thousands who have no idea what they have destroyed. The cemetery is a tangible witness to time. The burials are capsules in time that ask to be respected and left undisturbed. Family griots receiving those in the future, maintaining witness to the past. They soak up the salt and the tears of today, and they form a bridge to the future. We ask that planning agencies and public bodies come together to develop these alternatives, to talk about these alternatives, and to respect this hallowed place, so they are no longer complicit in this systematic removal of our heritage. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. Next, we have Juanelle Herron. Your 3 minutes begins now.
So why are we at Campo telling you about the Alexander Farm, our illustrious, unprecedented lengths in history? Because we understand that you collectively determine the next generation of transportation options for the region we call home. You have it within your power to put the decades-old, systemically racist and discriminatory practices of TxDOT's takings in check. We know that the mix of public and private funding of the state's roadways can be complex and politically fraught, but the effects of your fiduciary oversight are too rarely advantageous to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. You, the Campo Board, have it within your power to begin to correct the pattern of abuse of African American landowners throughout TxDOT's weaponization of eminent domain in Central Texas. We are here appealing to you because you have the power to stop this taking of a founding family's legacy that has tenaciously persisted against all the horrors of slavery, Jim Crow, African American disenfranchisement, and the depths of social injustice we have only begun to understand and rectify as a community, a state, and a nation. You can take a different approach. You can protect and preserve a rich and unique part of Texas history. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. That is all we have for comment on that. And now I'm going to open it up for questions from the board members of Heather or Tucker. So are there any questions from any of the board members?
Sure.
I'm sorry, if you could just say your name, because I can't see just who's that speaking.
Madam Chair, I was one. Jeff Trevelyan.
All right, go ahead, Commissioner Trevelyan. Thank you.
Okay. We did. My office did have a meeting with TxDOT, and I understand that alternate routes are being considered. I'd like to understand the status of that consideration, if I could, from TxDOT.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, this is Heather. So the alternatives analysis that we're looking at right now, as I mentioned, first we have to figure out the footprint width, and we've just are completing that analysis to let us know how wide the right-of-way would need to be. And additionally, after we met with the Alexanders and some other stakeholders, we have identified areas significantly rerouting, like similarly like you saw today, around these historic properties, because we definitely identify the need for alternate routes to limit the impacts to these properties. We unfortunately aren't ready at this time to show those alignments, but They're so far out off of the existing project, we had to go get an airplane and fly to get aerial survey and aerials so that we are ready to show next spring the different alternatives that we have been looking at. But ultimately we have to set the right-of-way footprint, and then we have to put design criteria to the alternative routes. And then we'll present those, and we have promised the Alexander family that we will meet with them at least a month before going public, so that they don't see these alternative alignments for the first time in the public forum.
Okay. May I ask that that my office be included in those briefings? It is. I am satisfied with the meetings and briefings that we've had thus far. I just want to make sure that we are involved and track all of the decisions that are made as we go forward. Just for the record, I think it's really important to understand that that this really is a significant place in the African American community around Austin, and that nobody can really argue that it was not custom historically to make sure that African American communities African American communities were involved in the decision making process. So I want to make sure that we are briefing the families as early as we possibly can. My office is going to be very interested in being briefed as well, and I want to make sure that we take all of these issues into primary consideration as we talk about the way we move forward.
Madam Chair, if I may.
I think that's Councilmember Mateo. Go ahead.
I wanted to say, first of all, I want to reiterate what Commissioner Trevelyan said. Heather, you did a phenomenal job briefing us. I think it's over a month ago or so regarding this issue. You obviously understood our concerns, which I appreciate. Commissioner Shea as well with that. And that meant a lot. And I appreciate your proactive approach with the family on this. Part of my concern was, frankly, we weren't understanding if there was actually some give and take, some conversations actually having, based on our public comments here in the meeting. So it's great to know that you are having those meetings and having those conversations. So that makes a difference. To the family, I want to say thank you very much for speaking out on this specific issue. We know all too well part of the problems and the issues that happen is that when people aren't made aware of or cognizant of this. So I know that myself and as well as everyone else in this board appreciates you being proactive, educating, speaking about this, meeting with staff to talk about this issue. I think that overall, in general, it's great to hear that. I know, Heather, you said that you're not ready to make public those other alternatives with that, but that we're looking at those things and we're trying to be pragmatic to make something that makes sense both for the family and for the region on that. That's honestly, this is the way government's supposed to work. So it's good to see that it's actually doing its job over here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Are there any other questions for TxDOT on this item?
This is Commissioner Terrio. Heather, I hope as part of TxDOT's look at this and study that you guys are also considering alternatives to the profile of the facility. Within certain areas, I think this section of 183 is currently 4 lanes divided and doesn't meet the right-of-way requirements for that long-term facility that you're looking at. But we've discussed similar issues related to Highway 21, the ultimate build out on that, and the impact of very wide right-of-ways for the future. And what is that going to mean as far as taking and destruction of properties along that future facility? So I hope also as part of the look, you're looking at alternative alignments, but you're also looking at alternative profiles for that facility.
Councilmember Flanagan.
Heather, do you have a response to that?
Yes, we are looking at all of that, and your comments are noted for sure. I wish I had more to show you today because I know, we have been working hard. It's just, the process needs to be the process. We're not quite there yet on our traffic analysis and everything, but there will be plenty of time for getting comments on the width and the alignments, and we'll take that comment of the profiles as well. We don't have to hurry on this project at all. The funding is not identified. If we need to spend a little bit more time once we get all of this out in the public, I'm okay with that. So definitely there is time for this for everyone to be heard. So I noted your comments, and we'll be sure to keep that in the project record and moving forward.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Heather. I think Councilman Flanagan had a question.
Yeah, really, it's just I want to second the profile issue because I can look up 183 on the northwest side of the city where my district is, and it's about 300 feet wide, and it's 4 lanes plus 4 lanes in the 4 lanes each direction, 4 lanes on the access road, and we're about to do 4 more lanes of a express lane project. It's only 300 feet wide, so I think there really is some profile conversation to have. And Tucker, I don't know what the role of the policy board is in TxDOT policy setting in terms of your default project rollout, but 400 feet is pretty wide for an urban and suburban setting when we're getting into these kind of uses that have been built up along the road. So I definitely second that, and thanks to Commissioner Trevelyan and Councilmember Mathier for your comments too.
All right, are there any other questions on item number 9? Okay, hearing none. Heather, thank you for your update. I appreciate it. We will move on to item number 10, which is a discussion on federal transit transportation section 310 program criteria. Ryan, queued up for that.
Thank you. Can y'all hear me okay?
You can.
Okay, perfect. So this item is just a discussion on the FTA 5310 program criteria. And just to remind everyone, if you're not familiar with this program, this is it's a grant program that's designated by FTA, and we essentially allocate nearly $1 million every year in 5310 funding to transportation programs. These can be nonprofits or government organizations, but these transportation programs are really kind of gap fillers that help augment the existing transit system that, the larger systems that are run by Capital Metro and CARTS, City of Round Rock, and also now the City of San Marcos. And so these funds basically fund tailored transportation programs that specifically serve older adults and those individuals with both physical and mental disabilities. And so that's just a reminder of the program. We've been selecting projects for this program since 2012. We had an agreement as the NPO, we select the designated recipient for these funds. And so that designated recipient is Capital Metro. And part of that agreement is that Capital Metro actually administers the program. But because they are an eligible recipient of the funds to use as a program, part of that agreement was that CAMPO would actually do the project selection. And so that's what we've been doing every year. And so what this item is the past couple of years have been incredibly competitive, and we're still using the same criteria that was approved in 2012. And so at the request of several board members, we did go back and look at the current criteria and really kind of look and see what we can do to kind of update the criteria to today's, to more align with the other criteria that we have for the other grant programs that we administer. So for that process, we did review available research and resources. There are a lot of resources out there, both from FTA and also the Transportation Research Board did a good survey of all the programs across the country. And then we also did review those individually. We looked at other programs, 5310 criteria. We looked at about 10 different programs to look at how they administer the program. We also did have a meeting with the grant administrator, the designated recipient Capital Metro, to make sure that whatever we do update still meets the requirements and intent of the program. And as Julia mentioned earlier, we did review this with the Technical Advisory Committee. We sent the current criteria to them and then asked for their feedback, and so we could incorporate that into the update. And then today we are here with you, of course, and would like to get your feedback. We do have some draft criteria that we'll review with you and take any feedback and answer any questions on that. And so briefly, I'll just, you should probably remember this, but this is the current process that we use. You have the basic eligibility requirements. These are just basic FTA requirements. The projects have to serve the urbanized area. The sponsors can be a nonprofit organization. They're typically a nonprofit organization. Up until about, I'd say 7 years ago, with an update, I think it was MAP 21 that allowed local governments also to apply for the operating funds. And then the activities are basically either traditional capital projects where you'll be buying buses or, just basic capital, or you can pay for operating expenses such as salaries and gas and things of that nature. And so on the right, you'll see the scoring criteria. This is what was approved in 2012, and we had these 7 criteria. And I won't list them all here, but you've got these this list here and also the weights that are provided for each criteria. And so that was our starting point. So we did take a stab at updating this process. Eligibility remains the same. And if you look at the scoring criteria, this is a draft. It is essentially the same. We did move budget over into a readiness section. We believe that our readiness will bring that in kind of in line with the other the criteria that we have for other transportation projects. And so we believe that budget, instead of being scored, is a basic requirement. And then also included in readiness is the ability of the local sponsors to provide the local match. Like all federal programs, this is a matching program where they have to provide either 20% or 50% of the total project cost. And then also we want to ensure that they are in good standing. Many of the applicants, come back year after year for funding. So we do want to ensure that they are in good standing with the grant program. And then, as Julia mentioned, one of the suggestions from the TAC was to move the project call to a biannual schedule. Currently, we do it every year, usually about this time, and we do think this is actually a good recommendation to go to a biannual basis. We think this will, instead of giving out roughly $1 million once a year, we'll give out $2 million every 2 years, and this will better alleviate the stress of the sponsors having to apply for the funding. It is labor intensive for them, and this will allow them to plan better over the next couple of years because they will have that funding secured. So we do think this is a great recommendation. And then on the right, you'll see some updated scoring criteria. We have shifted some of the weights. Program sustainability is the same thing as financial sustainability, and you'll see that the benefit, we reduced the points on benefit because we do believe that is kind of captured in all of the criteria in some way, fashion or another. So we just gave that, kind of reduced that down to 10 points. And then you'll see the next 5 criteria are 5 points each. And we believe these weights are appropriate because these are important, but they're also not deal breakers. When you look at program experience, we're looking to see if somebody's had experience either with this program or with another similar type of program. And then also coordination and partnerships and interconnectivity. Both of these things are important, but at the same time, a lot of the effective programs that we do fund through this program some of them are independent of the rest of the transit system. I'll say, for example, Senior Access. This is a program that we fund that seniors can call in. Senior Access will come pick them up and take them wherever they need to go. It doesn't necessarily connect them into the larger transit system. It'll take them to run their errands to the doctor's office or to the grocery store. So we thought that, it's great if they do have those partnerships with, say, Cap Metro, but we didn't want that to be a deal breaker. And then RTCC plan and goals and objectives. We bumped that up to 20 points. This is actually really important because this program is designed to implement that plan. Anything that is approved to be funded actually has to be directly listed in the plan. So we thought that was important. And then performance measures and monitoring. Like all of the other things we've been doing here, federal funding, we need to be able to measure its effectiveness and be able to monitor how our investments over time are impacting the transit network. And so we're asking that the sponsors have a performance measure and monitoring system in place. And then finally, the cost benefit analysis, similar to the way we do our other scoring criteria. We have the cost benefit analysis where we'll have a calculation that'll basically look at the value of the projects based on the investment that we're giving them, that we'll look at ridership, the total project cost, and how much funding they're requesting. And then we'll look at the impact through an objective cost benefit analysis. And that is the bulk of that is the highest ratio of points with the cost benefit analysis, because it is very straightforward and will give you that straightforward value analysis of the project. And so hopefully this update to the criteria will balance the subjective or the quantitative and the qualitative aspects of these projects. And that's essentially what we've done here. And so that concludes the presentation on the update. I'll be more than happy to take any feedback on what you want changed, if anything, and answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it. Can you hear me? Okay. Clarify that performance measure and monitoring seems to be the new piece. The others have sort of been redefined and shifted around, but that piece is really the new insert in most of this. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks. And I know Councilmember Kitchen, I believe I saw her pop up with a question.
Shall I go ahead? So on the cost benefit analysis, can you remind me the weighting it had before?
The weighting before that, I believe it was 15 points, excuse me. Cost effectiveness was essentially that cost benefit analysis.
It went from 15 to 30?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. So can you talk with me a bit more about that? And the reason I'm asking about it is the thinking behind it is that you had explained why the interconnectivity was something that you wouldn't want to raise too high because of the kinds of projects. Would that not, that thinking relates somewhat to this cost benefit? Because 30 points is, can you go back to the next slide? 30 points is the highest points given to any one area. So can you just help me understand the rationale a little bit better for that?
Yes. So the cost benefit analysis, if you recall on the other criteria that we have for, say roadway projects and, strictly transit projects and active transportation, most all of those have a 50% cost benefit analysis ratio against it's half performance measure and half cost benefit analysis. And so that was kind of the thinking there, is that the cost benefit analysis is the most straightforward way to measure the impact of a program. And so that's why we thought it deserved to be the highest, had the highest amount of points in this process. And the other thing is, one thing we've noticed in past project calls is that projects are tending to bunch up. Quite frequently, we'll have, a lot of these programs are very, very similar in nature. So being able to tease out the differences between them can most effectively be done through the cost benefit analysis, because it'll give you just a straightforward answer in regards to that investment. And so that, to me, I thought was the most appropriate way why it's weighted that way. And that'll help kind of differentiate between two projects that may look on the surface very similar, but then, we may have one that's, same, it'll be the same program essentially, but one will be serving, be asking for the same amount of funding, but one will be serving more riders. Perhaps they're serving 100 riders as opposed to 30. And so we know which one will be the better one out of those two to invest in. And so that's what that's designed to tease out.
Okay, and then did we get comments from, do we have any comments from Cat Metro on this one, or from the TAC? I think it came before the TAC, if I'm understanding correctly, but on the actual weighting, have we gotten their insight?
No, we haven't gotten their insight on the weighting. We did basically on the current criteria to use to kind of come up with these weights. So I'll be more than happy to get their feedback again on that. The main comment they got that we received from them was to move to a biannual schedule. I think that was the only comment that we did receive.
Well, I'd just like to understand from them if they have any comments on the difference in weighting. It is quite a bit of moving around the points, which may be fine. I'm trying to think through the impact of that, and I would like the TAC, even if it's just informally asking for the TAC members to give some feedback. Is this going to be coming back to us for approval?
Yes, ma'am. That was one thing I did. I'd like to bring this back to approval next month. And I'd be more than happy if you want me to send this out to the TAC and give them, maybe to the end of the week to give me feedback, and then we can present a more polished version next month.
Sure, that would be fine. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, are there any other questions of Ryan on 10?
I have one, Commissioner Long. This is Craig.
Go ahead, Morgan.
And you may have said this, Ryan, and I apologize. What was the reasoning for reanalyzing this?
It was a request at the last policy board meeting that when we had the approval, the last time we did the grant call, I think this was back in January of this year. I think, it was just asked for us to kind of revisit and see what we could do, change it if we needed to or not. So.
I must have been asleep at that point. I will say that, it's greatly benefited Round Rock. Matter of fact, that we probably need more of it. It's the use of our senior community it's just crazy, especially during COVID. And thank God we have senior access to help offset it. But I was just curious. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Madam Chair, this is Jane Houston. I do have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Mayor.
Program experience is only 5 points. I'm not sure I understand why that would be so low.
I think it was, experience, I think one of those things was accurately measuring experience, but then, we also want to open it up to every year we get new applicants that we haven't seen before, and we didn't want to, if it's a good program, it's a good program, and we didn't want program experience to necessarily, kick somebody out of the running if they have a decent program in place. So that was the thinking there. It's like, sure, if you have experience, I think that's helpful, but I don't think that would necessarily, I don't want that to preclude other new programs from being able to apply.
Okay, then I'm misunderstanding. When you say program experience, you mean experience with our program? I'm just looking to make sure somebody's got some experience in a similar situation. It's not somebody that put together a group yesterday, because this is a big deal and it's very important. So I was just looking for experience, similar experience, not necessarily that they had to have experience with our program.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that also goes into readiness as well, as making sure that if we award funding to this particular program, whichever one it may be, that they do have the experience to be able to be able to pull it off essentially. Because we get new applicants that, there was one, I think the nonprofit had been started 3 months before they applied for funding, and we did not believe they had the experience to do that. So that's the other, and not only will it be captured in the scoring criteria, but that will be reviewed in readiness as well. If we see somebody that we, it's a program that we just don't think they can, use this funding, then we won't recommend it.
Then should it be renamed, take program out and just say experience/readiness or something like that?
I'd be open to that, certainly. And also the program experience is not just 5310, but it's that they have experience managing like federal grants in general.
Right.
Anything comparable would be acceptable as well, but more.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about, is if they've done something similar, that's great. But like you say, if they just fired up, a few months ago, then they may not be ready. So thank you.
Thank you.
Ryan, just to clarify, I believe one of the changes that you're highlighting here is readiness becomes part of eligibility. So it can't be their first rodeo. And so you've moved some of that over. It'll be captured really as the first funnel to get into the scoring criteria. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. And that's very similar to, the way we did it in the project call back in 2018. It really is a screening mechanism to, we don't want to score anything if we know it's not going to be able to move forward. So yeah, that's absolutely correct.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions?
Madam Chair?
Yes,
Jeff
Commissioner.
My question is, how are we encouraging successful plans, or those who run successful plans into other areas of the region that they might be successful in? What I mean by that is when we look at something like the Capital Area Rural Transit Program, what are we doing to identify what's being done well and how maybe it could partner with, for example, the new pickup programs that Cap Metro has put into place? For example, we put together Travis County put together a transit development plan that works up the northeastern corridor into Manor, and we found where we put a pickup site, we have increased participation or ridership tenfold. What can we do to identify best practices in areas where we know that there is a need and there are some resources, but they're not married at this point, and maybe we can create economies of scale by marrying them? How are we identifying the assets that are in the area that may not be talking at this point?
That's a very good point. And that's actually, so the RTCC plan itself, this is an offshoot to fund those initiatives. And that's what that plan actually does. We're actually in the middle of updating that starting this year. But what that plan does is it analyzes, it does a gap analysis. It does look at where there are deficiencies and maybe some opportunities really to, like you mentioned, just to connect, programs and people. And so that's really why the RTCC plan and goals and objectives, why we bumped up the points on that, because that really, those objectives and goals in there, that's what it's designed to do. And so projects that actually address those goals will, rise to the top, and those will be the ones that we're selecting. So, and that also comes back to the performance measure and monitoring. It's, being able to monitor how these programs are being impacted and being impactful to the region. I think we can go back and look and see maybe there's some better areas that we can invest in. So it's kind of sprinkled throughout, but I would say the RTCC plan is really, those points there are really going to make those effective programs kind of rise to the top. And then the interconnectivity and coordination and partnerships kind of touch on that, but not as directly as the plan itself.
I would like to talk with you offline and work through the criteria just so that I understand it better and can be helpful, identifying things that are working in our TDP.
Okay, absolutely. I'm more than happy to. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions on item number 10?
Commissioner Long.
Okay, yeah, Commissioner Beckett, I was actually going to call on you. I know you've been involved with the RTCC, so please go ahead.
That was exactly what I was going to ask is, Ryan, are we going to make sure that the RTCC board has looked over the scoring criteria and are comfortable with it?
Yeah, we can certainly do that. I know, so their goals and everything are kind of distilled in that plan. So hopefully this will, but I'll be more than happy to do that. I think, the only issue is that most of them are applicants as well. So, that's always, kind of not the issue, but we try to, we want their input, of course, because, they're the ones who are going to be, applying for these funds. But at the same time, we don't want them to necessarily weigh in too much, I guess. If that makes any sense?
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but I mean, the chair, I think at least send it to Lyle.
Yeah.
Who's, he's outside of the applicant process and being a, city council guy. I think I'd like at least Lyle to see it and make sure.
And that's always, that conflict of interest is always the best point. But I think the more feedback, the better, because they know this transit world better, better than anybody. So I think that's a good point. So I'll get it to Lyle, and if he wants to take it to the full RTCC, I'm happy with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Beckett. So I think we've heard from everybody that wanted to speak on this issue. So we'll move on to item number 11, which is discussion on the 2021 Transportation Alternatives Set Aside Program Project Call. Ryan, I believe that's you again. Go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So we are gearing up to hold a transportation alternative set aside call for projects early next year. So just to remind everyone what that is it's basically a pullout from the STBG funding that the region receives. It's approximately $2.5 million that we receive annually in TASA funds. These are a little bit different than STBG funding in that they do have a time limit on them. The funding does lapse 4 years after it's been authorized at the federal level. And the funding that is only for the urbanized area of the Campo region. TxDOT actually administers TASA funding to the small urbanized communities as well as the rural areas of the region. And so the funding itself is for smaller scale transportation projects and activities. This includes bike and pedestrian facilities, recreational trails, safe routes to schools, and some transportation related community improvements. And so when you think of the active transportation criteria that we have, that is essentially what this is geared towards. Just to remind everyone, back in 2018, we did allocate nearly $10 million in TASA funding to projects for fiscal years 2019 and 2022. These were bundled up along with the other Category 2 and Category 7 funding that we did allocate. And so we are anticipating approximately $10 million to be available for fiscal years 23 through 2026. This is in line with, the continuing resolutions to the FAST Act. And then, of course, if there are any changes at the federal level, there may be, additional funding available. And so we will use the current project selection process that we used last time in 2018. This includes a readiness evaluation of the projects, which is probably the most important thing for TASA projects, and is that since they do have that time limit, they are on a not a tighter schedule, but it is very, very important that readiness is evaluated for these projects. And then once they pass readiness, we will evaluate them based on the performance measures, as well as a cost benefit analysis. And so we are anticipating opening the project call in early 2021. A couple of important notes. This relates to the Deferral Initiative that we did back in June. So one option is that we can allocate the entirety of anticipated funding to new projects that apply. So we can allocate the entirety of the $10 million. But there is a second option, and this is something that we're recommending, is that we can allocate funding to, there were a couple of eligible projects from the deferred Category 7 list. And we are recommending that we refund those projects subject to readiness evaluation and also sponsor coordination. We do need to check with these sponsors to make sure, A, do they want to move forward with these funds if they become available? And then also we need to revisit both of these projects and reevaluate their readiness. They were deferred because they had some project delays. And so we want to make sure that if we do fund these, again, because of the time sensitivity issue with the funding, that we need to make sure that they are ready to move forward. So, but if we did that, we'd be looking at allocating $3.7 million to those two projects. And then the remainder of the funds would be available for new projects to apply for. So that would be $6.3 million available to other sponsors. So that is we are recommending option 2, but just want to let everyone be aware that we are moving forward with the TASA call for projects early next year, and I will be more than happy to take any questions or comments about the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. And just to clarify, this is an informational item, so the policy board can kind of think about it, weigh in on option 1, option 2. But I think if y'all recall, when we went through the deferral process, one of the things that I think the board was loud and clear on is that as funding became available, deferred projects, we wanted to be able to look at those. But readiness is going to be important in the timing of those. So Ashby, did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
Yes, Madam Chair. Can y'all hear me? Okay. So going back to the purpose of giving the board this presentation today, we wanted to ask, or at least start the discussion with you about whether or not the board would prefer for us to initiate a call early 2021 for these funds. As Ryan stated, for option 1 and 2, you also have an option to do nothing at this point. One of the reasons we're giving you this presentation today is we're trying to be proactive, and because this money has stricter time limits on it than a lot of the other funding that we deal with, whether it's category 2 or category 7 funding, we are not recommending waiting until we have another call for projects in 2022 or 2023, because we feel like you as local governments would lose time, and potentially we might lose money as a region. So we were trying to be proactive and saying, hey, let's ask the board now how they'd like to handle this moving forward. And if your pleasure is for us to do a call for projects next year, we can certainly do that. We do think that we ought to look at the 2 deferred projects first. And that goes to a conversation I've had with Vice Chair Kitchen a couple times. And we've been working with both the City of Austin and with Travis County staff on the Northern Walnut Creek Trail project and the Blake Manor shared use path. We feel like those projects, they've been working on them now for a while since the deferral, and we feel like maybe they are in a position where they can move forward in a timely manner, but we will need to see something from them saying that money, if the board chooses option 2, that the money allocated to those projects, that they can meet the let date and move forward, because if they can't, then we're going to potentially lose money as a region. So just wanted to clear that up, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ashby. And just a reminder that the 2018 call that we did was for funding for FY19 through 22. So what we are talking about would be FY23 through FY26. Is that correct? Okay. And this is really, to Ashby's point, just getting a jump start. And so if you can mull it over, and then we can look at option 1, 2, or to Ashby's point, option 3 as do nothing this year and wait till later. We can look at those, but we'll take action on that so that we can give direction at the next meeting to staff, as well as let the community know about this possible funding. Are there any additional questions about Ryan's presentation?
No questions. Only a statement, if I could.
Go ahead.
First of all, I appreciate the staff work that was done. And I just wanted to say that it seems to me that as I was looking through the materials, these are a couple of projects that have already gone through a vetting process, and it might be efficient. The most efficient thing that we might do to move forward on projects that have gone through our vetting system with the appropriate adjustments and reassessments. It would seem that it would be easier to do that than to start all over again, as opposed to moving forward with what has been vetted.
All right. Are there any other comments?
This is Vice Chair Kitchen.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yes, thank you. And I think our intent was when we went through the deferral process that we would consider deferred projects first, subject, of course, to the readiness criteria that that Ashby just laid out for us. So I think this is the first time this has come up for us with regard to those deferred projects. So I think it's important for us to keep with that intent. So Ashby, do you think that if I'm hearing you right, you're still doing a little bit more vetting to make sure that these are ready within the timeline so we don't lose money? Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
But we've been talking to both City of Austin staff and Travis County staff about the respective projects, and we feel like they're getting to a point where we feel comfortable with that.
Okay. All right. Well, as long as they fit that criteria, then I think that we should go ahead with those. And then the remaining funding. Well, let's see. So we'll go ahead with option 2. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that item at next meeting, either option 1 or the do nothing option meeting. All right, so we'll move on to item number 2, the executive report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So actually, instead of going in order, I'm actually going to skip down to 12C. So the first item there, so about a month and a half ago, I received a call from the Transportation Research Board for the National Academy of Sciences, and they were asking if I would facilitate a national panel to look at equity considerations in transportation. And this was, the panel actually already took place. And it was a number of people from across the country, folks representing transit operators, highway departments, state highway departments of transportation, and also researchers, 2 people from Portland State, Dr. Carol Lewis from Texas Southern University out of Houston. Then there were also people who worked for Transportation Research Board as well. And the purpose of the panel was to come up with research ideas on equity that could be threaded into the National Academies of Sciences research work for the next 3 or 4 years. And so it was meant to be a one-time brainstorming activity. We had a meeting for 2 hours. We had a really good meeting. And I have not seen the proceedings from the meeting yet, but Transportation Research Board staff is going to condense everything that we said during that meeting and then look for common threads that were said throughout, and then use that as a basis for research on equity and transportation going forward. So just wanted to report on that. And then I also wanted.
Before you move forward, I just wanted to take a minute to say that's a big deal. And that was a big deal for our region. And it's just a testimony to the respect that you've earned throughout the state and the nation in what you do. And what you do makes Campo look good. So we appreciate it. And just thank you for your leadership there. We really appreciate it. And congratulations for being selected to do that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The other item I wanted to report on was to give some recognition to Central Texas Regional Mobility Authority. They recently received an award from the Engineering News Record for the work that they did on 45 Southwest. In particular, they were highlighted for the work they did on both the planning and the construction of 45 Southwest, and how they were very sensitive to the environment, both during the construction and in the operations of the project. So just wanted to say congratulations to CTRMA for their award from Engineering News Record. And now I'll skip back up. Actually, let me go back to a thing that's actually not on here. So Vice Chair Kitchen, you and I have talked a couple of times about looking at the deferred projects and coming up with the prioritization process for the things that we did not discuss today. And as I discussed with you on the phone earlier, towards the end of last week, as staff, we are still kicking that around internally. We plan to bring something to this body to start to think about no later than December of this year. It's our goal to have something to you to look at the November board meeting. But there's no rush. Right now, we don't see any money dropping out of the sky between now and February, but we are working on that, and we haven't forgotten. So I'll now skip back up to item 12A, and I'll ask Nirved to give that presentation.
Go ahead, Nirav.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. This is Nirav Ved, Campo staff. Next slide, please. Ryan. Oh, next slide, please. Thank you. So these slides are here to discuss how the pandemic has affected our transportation system in two ways: the impact of transportation finances in the state and how working from home has become a more prominent commute option. This first slide here shows the major sources of funding for the State Highway Fund, which funds almost all transportation projects in Texas funded with either federal or state money. You can see that after the federal government, the largest sources are sales tax, or Proposition 7, and motor fuels taxes. Proposition 1, or proceeds from oil and natural gas production taxes, make up less than 10% of that budget. Next slide, please. The next two slides are going to look at the effects the pandemic has had on various portions of the State Highway Fund. The blue bar shows the expected earnings for fiscal year 2020, while the orange bar shows the actual collections. For motor fuels and registration fees, which make up about 28% of the State Highway Fund, the state collected about $150 million less than what was expected for those two categories. Next slide, please. When looking at the propositions, Prop 1 related to oil and natural gas production provided about $330 million less than expected. This, combined with the shortfall for motor fuels, taxes, and registration fees, combines for about a $450 million shortfall, which represents about 4% of the State Highway Fund's budget for fiscal year 2020. Next slide, please. Now transitioning to working from home, we are going to look at who in the region has access to a computer and internet. A significant percentage have broadband, and even more own a computer, but you can see that those who do not own a computer or have internet are more likely to be either Black or Hispanic, especially when compared to their overall population overall proportion of their population to the region. Next slide, please. In terms of who has primarily worked from home, people who are white make up almost 3/4 of that category, while people who are Black and Hispanic are more likely to rely on public transportation. Next slide, please. These are the industries here that are present in our region, and the ones identified will be discussed over the next few slides. Next slide. In these two graphs, they show the different industries where workers are more likely to either use transit or work from home. You can see that transit users are more likely to work in retail, healthcare, or grocery stores, which are industries that were deemed essential during the first months of the pandemic. On the other graph, you can see that people who work from home are more likely to work in professional or financial positions. Next slide. In those industries that rely more on transit, you can see that people who are Black or Hispanic are more represented than their proportion of the workforce. Next slide. And here you can see the opposite, where people who are white are more represented than their proportion of the workforce in industries where people are more likely to work from home. And next slide. This second to last slide just shows the different types of trips people take on a daily basis. The second column shows the number of trips devoted to going to work only make up 17% of all trips. This shows that even if more people started working from home, that only impacts a limited number of overall trips made. And next slide. So in summary, what these slides have shown that not everyone gets to benefit from the work from home push that has happened from the beginning of the pandemic. And even if everyone did start working from home, the total number of overall trips produced would not be that many. What we need to continue to work on, the challenges of equitably reducing trips and the demand on our transportation system will require things like go out gathering more data, conducting outreach and coordination with our fellow agencies. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nirav. I appreciate it. Ashby, do you have any comments on that, or if not, if there were any questions that came up from the board from Nirav's presentation?
On the presentation itself, we're still waiting to get more data as it continues to come in, both from TxDOT and from other sources. What we do know from TxDOT traffic counts is when we look at things like I-35 and we look at even MOPAC for the general purpose lanes, the traffic counts that we're seeing are getting close to where they were pre-pandemic. About 85% is the last thing I saw from the district. So we need to see what the rest of that means. One of the things I'm still trying to figure out why we aren't seeing the MOPAC express lanes back where we were when the general purpose lanes are similar to what they were before. The 183A toll lanes are pretty much back where they were. So we're trying to sift through that data and get better understanding of what we need to do going forward. And we do know now that I guess from a community and a regional perspective, we need to be talking about broadband access, not just as a transportation issue, but also as an education issue until we get further along. So I'll stop and see if there's any questions.
All right, thank you. Anybody have any questions?
Ashby, I found that really, really interesting. Has there been any rationale as to the rhyme or reason why MOPAC express lanes is having less traffic with that? And then, but you said 85% return in traffic, correct?
Yeah, on the general purpose lanes.
Wow. Interesting.
The only thing I can figure out right now, and this is just me guessing, is that MOPAC Express sort of took care of, I would call, overflow. It was that percentage of the traffic that was sort of over the capacity of the roadway to handle. And right now, the general purpose lanes haven't reached that level again yet. That's the only thing I can figure out.
Thank you.
All right.
This is Councilmember Kitchen.
Go ahead, Councilmember.
I just wanted to thank you all for that presentation. You know, the question of the impact of working from home is something that I'm hearing a lot. And so, and some people, it's tempting to believe that that's sufficient, but we obviously know that's not. And so having this kind of information available, I think, is very helpful for our community. So thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you. Ashby, I'll turn it back over to you for the rest of item number 12. Do you have anything else on 12B? Project updates, anything there?
Let me turn that over to Ryan.
Hi, thank you. I just want to let the board know that we do have the project progress reports in your backup materials. It was brought to my attention that some of the project progress reports did not update correctly, so we will be sending out an updated project progress report probably tomorrow or Wednesday. But these progress reports only that you see in the backup materials are only tracking the active projects. They are not tracking the closeout projects or any that were deferred. But if you, we track, we have quarterly project reports that are submitted by the sponsors, and this allows us to kind of keep an eye on all the investments that we've made over the years to ensure that they're moving forward. So if you have any questions about anything, please let me know, but those progress reports are available. And we will either in the November or December board meeting, we'll do an actual presentation on the progress of the region, just to give you a holistic view of the progress of all the projects you've invested in. So I'll take any questions, and that's all I have. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions? And just by way of reminder, that begins on page 57 of your board packet and runs through the end. So thank you for not printing that. But it is in the backup material, and for those viewing online, it's also available on the website. Ashby, do you have anything to add in conclusion?
Yes, Madam Chair. One thing I did want to point out that when you look at the progress report, we did receive some information from the city of San Marcos on the status of their projects that for some reason did not make it into the actual report itself. So when you look at that, please don't think that San Marcos isn't working to get their projects ready. They are, and that will get corrected and sent back out.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. And the only other announcement that I have under item number 3 is we will try to do a executive committee meeting this month, whether it's Friday or maybe on Thursday. I understand Austin doesn't have a council meeting, but I'll get with Ashby and Kim and we'll check everybody's calendars to see what works the best. And then just also as a reminder, the next TAC meeting is Monday, October 19th at 2 p.m. And our next Transportation Policy Board meeting will be November 2nd at 2 p.m. And with that, we will go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Is there a motion?
So moved.
By Houston, second.
All right. Thank you all, and have a